Hey, day, everyone. Want to welcome you back to the virtual chat series, Keep Learning Strong, where we're trying to meet the needs of the moment and thriving beyond it with continuous learning. If I can say that another way, Candace and I, as we were entering these kind of unprecedented times to what we both now refer to as the COVID, as we entered into that, we started hearing from a lot of our comrades and peers, folks that we're networked with, that just kind of the concern around what happens now. Typically, when businesses go through a tough economy, and this has certainly impacted the economy beyond belief, learning often gets cut, and so this is an attempt to keep learning strong, therefore the hashtag, and doing that by sharing thoughts and ideas around why learning is more important than ever. And we're very happy to have our guest with us today, Ryan. Before I move into him, let me just share some information about the series Keep Learning Strong. And as I said before, our goal is to promote learning and the professionals that make it happen. And you can reach out to us through LinkedIn, through Twitter, through .com. We invite you to join the movement. We'll make one more short pitch at the end of the talk today, but we would love to share your stories. And in some cases, like with Ryan today, by establishing you as a contact, potentially do an interview with you as well. So please do join us, continue to join us, and I hope that everybody gets something out of this. With that in mind, I will kind of share a little bit on myself. I'll keep this very, very brief. I spent 30 years for a couple of large global organizations as the HR leader. And during that time, I was not only responsible for human resources, but also talent management, including talent acquisition, talent retention, and then the e-learning, or the learning that was tucked underneath that as well. And it was during those 30 years that I developed a great passion for, kind of developing employees and doing that through continuous learning. And Candace, I'll give you an opportunity, my partner Candace, to introduce yourself.
Sure. So again, Candace McGlenn, I am a learning solutions consultant with Enovation Solutions. And for the last 10 years, I've worked in the talent development space. So just really happy to be a part of this campaign where we are promoting learning, those who are doing some amazing things in the talent in organizational spaces. So just really excited to be here, and I'll kick it to you, Roger.
Yes, and with no further delay, we'd like to welcome our guest speaker today, Ryan McCarty. Ryan is a known keynote speaker with a series of talks around Bring Your Soul to Work. He's an author of a book. I felt like I almost knew Ryan before the call. I may have said on one of these interviews before, my favorite quote at the moment is by Sir Richard Branson, and it goes, that a comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there. So when I saw Ryan's quote around "there's no such thing as comfortable growth," it definitely struck a chord. And with that, I'd like to welcome Ryan. Ryan, any opening thoughts as we begin our interview today?
Yeah. Thank you, first of all, Candace and Roger. Thank you so much for having me on. Secondly, I do have more than one T-shirt. I'm noticing that on the side there of the introduction, I'm wearing the same exact shirt. I have several of these, but I do wear other. The beard is something I keep all the time.
So it's not a
So-
COVID beer. That's good to know.
No, it's almost like the picture just came to life. So here I am, and grateful, I think, is the word. The opportunity that we have, even in this conversation, having the reality that all of us are facing, isolated, on our own, working at home. Many of us, our experiences are quite different, but I think we can all be grateful for the accessibility that we have to have these type of conversations that wouldn't even 10 years ago have been as easy to conduct. And so I think it's just interesting how, the space of learning and development and growth and being able to meet with one another virtually, that I just feel grateful for that and grateful for being asked to be on. So thank you so much for having me on today.
Absolutely, Ryan, and thanks for sharing those thoughts. We're glad, we're tickled to have you. So
you.
maybe a little bit of a history lesson with regards to who you are as well as your company would be a great place to start.
Yeah, goodness. Where do we begin? So I'd like to go all the way back to my childhood, actually, because now, as a result of childhood trauma and experiences that I had as a 6-year-old little boy, my mother had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and my father was a heroin addict at that time. Sadly, lost my mom at 6 years old. My father was continuing to be a drug addict during that time, and fortunately, I had teachers, adults that came in and stepped in and were really, really crucial for me growing up. Mentors, coaches that really came alongside me that allowed me to learn and to grow and to really have this heart to make an impact on the world and to lean my life in the world in such a way that I could impact other children, families in broken situations that I felt very personal, obviously because of my own experience. And that led me into over 20 years of nonprofit work. I was in full-time ministry for a lot of that time, and just really spent the majority of my life really in meaningful, missional, purposeful type work. And 7 years ago, I stepped into corporate America. So I had one foot in nonprofit and one foot in for-profit for a couple years. And I was kind of straddling that reality of that dichotomy of, on one hand, working very purposeful, and on the other hand, wanting to see how we could embed purpose within for-profit work. And and that's what led to this movement at TCC. It's one of the largest Verizon retailers in the country. Currently today, they're in over 42 states. They have over 3,000 employees. It's obviously a very successful business. But the very core of what that business is about became very missional through what we called the culture of good. And it was about purpose internal, but also purpose external. So how are we engaging our employees, customers, cause that can make the world a better place, provide fulfillment to employees, and also a reason to do business with TCC. And so culture of good continued to grow. There's the book that you mentioned for other companies to do the same. And then culture of good became its own entity. And so today I co-founded Culture of Good and now work exclusively to teach other companies how to grow a movement of doing good. That's not a check of the box. It's not kind of tacked onto the side of the business, but it speaks to the very soul of the organization. So that's what I do today through the Culture of Good, is just bring all of that soul of a nonprofit into for-profit work.
That's a great, it's very compelling and inspiring at the same time. So you've got our attention. with that story. And so I guess my next question would be around what does it mean to you to keep learning strong? And maybe the more important part of that is why it's important in these times to have a bit of a focus on learning, especially now.
Yeah, that's a great question. When we speak of these times, one of the words is unprecedented. The other day I posted, finish this statement, unprecedented times call for unprecedented blank. So obviously the obvious answers are leadership, empathy, kindness, those things. But when I think also in terms of this conversation, unprecedented times calls for unprecedented learning. Because anytime you step into newness, learning is not something that's optional. Right now, what we're doing is learning every single day based on the experiences. I rarely have a day, especially currently right now, where I don't learn something either about myself, about the organization, about my teammates. Learning is inevitable. The question is, are we doing it intentional? And how are we doing that in a way that really leads us toward a direction that we want to go, either as an organization, as an individual? Because in order for me to go from point A to point B, the distance between point A to point B is the distance of what I've learned along the way. If I were to look back, and I think you can speak to any leader about this concept, if you look back over your life, what allowed you, or what was a very strong mark of in terms of your growth, had to do with, I learned this. And as we get older, we start to say, man, I wish I would have known this when I was younger, right? What are we saying? We're saying, man, if I would have learned this earlier, it would have made such a profound impact on my quality of life, on my skill set, on what I could offer in terms of contribution at work, to the world, all of that. So as leaders, I think it's imperative for us to really position ourselves in a place where we take on the role, if we're really considered leaders, we take on the role of saying, well, if we have those that are leaning on us for their growth and development, that we position ourselves and give them every tool possible for them to grow and develop as far as they want to reach. And this is where I think accessibility and the ability to access learning allows us then to grow. It allows us to look back and say, I'm really grateful that I invested in myself and I invested in others, because it was part of that investment that really got us over the hump or got us further than what we even thought we could have been. It all comes down, to me, it all comes down to looking back and saying, the reason I was able to get from point A to point B is because I learned something new and that changed my life. And so it's important, as long as you see your future as progressive, and as long as you have a growth mindset, and as long as you desire more and believe that you deserve it, learning is the pathway toward that. If I don't learn what I need to know now, then where I'm headed will kick me out. So my future is prepared, but I have to be prepared for my future. So I believe that the way that we step in line with our destiny and our purpose has to do with the steps of learning that we take along the way. Leaders are learners, and then leaders are those that help others learn, you know?
That's a great answer. And I love the simplicity of it, right? It's very visual to think of getting from point A to point B in your life. And also very, I think, easy to think of things that you learn from point A to point B and how that was essential in getting there. So great perspective on that. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe a bit more personal with regards to your business. How has the speed of change and these unprecedented times, as you said, impacting your organization kind of in real time?
Yeah, well, you know, speed is an interesting way of describing it. It's very fast, and I don't know that anything's ever going to slow down at this point. In terms of how it's impacting our organization with the culture of good, we've really had to rethink how we're teaching. Another way that we could think about leadership is through the lens of teaching. And I know some of your listeners may be at home and they didn't choose to be a teacher, but they have kids at their house. And now all of a sudden, not only they're a full-time employee, but they're also a full-time teacher, principal, and you know, among other things, right? And so, you know, when we think about teaching, when we think about how we get our messaging across, the speed of society and what we're facing currently right now, again, back to that conversation, requires a different rethink of how we're deploying that information. We were really fortunate because we somewhat of an e-learning type solution to begin with. So it's very turnkey, digitally delivered, self-led, self-paced type learning over 10 months, which seems really long, but in order to do the work of building a culture of good, it takes, you know, any type of cultural work takes upwards to 36 months within an organization until you start to see really substantial change. To deploy it that way. However, we've had to rethink ways of engagement, ways that people are consuming information, where are people spending their time, and how to really add additional value to ensure that if somebody's going to spend an hour with us listening to a webinar or a conversation like this, or learning online or development or growing a culture of good within their business, we've had to and continue to have these conversations around this very question all the time. So the speed of change, I think it's easy to get caught up in, you know, throwing everything away and trying new ideas. But I think it's important to establish some stability within business as well, and continue to engage with the audience or engage with your market. And that's what we've tried to do with the culture of good, to create, hey, this is who we are. We're not going to adopt 13 other ways of doing it. This is who we are and what we have to offer. How then do we use what we're really good at in this time of change right now? Where do we fit into this conversation? How relevant can we be? Because it's back to what you talked about, Roger, and Candace as well. You said during times like this, many times learning gets put on a back burner. Well, I do everything around culture. You know, the conversation around culture and building a culture of good and building culture internal and external. And the same type of conversation is being had in those spaces as well. As, you know, culture kind of gets put on the back burner. It's just about profitability and making money, that type of thing. And so, you know, the speed of change has really created that, you know, that big question mark is how do we become relevant? And so we've had to change how we're engaging with our audience. We've had to change how we're bringing our solution and bringing our messaging to the marketplace, which I think has been refreshing to me, because I personally like change and I like to rethink things. And so for us, the speed has been beneficial because it's caused us to kind of take a step back and rethink how we're getting our messaging out, and how is that messaging relevant today as opposed to how was it relevant 3 months ago.
Great, Ryan. Thank you for that. With your clients and customers, are you seeing anything common there with them than what you're experiencing, or much the same of what you're experiencing?
There's some similarities for sure. However, it seems as though for the first month, 2 months, as we were in lockdown and continue to be in lockdown, as I was calling customers and clients and so forth, a lot of the clients, the customers were saying, we need to hold off on doing, like I was saying, we need to hold off on doing this work for a little bit. We're hanging on by a thread. So there's realities around business where we have some businesses that we work with that are focused on how do we keep the doors open. There's other businesses that we have that, are all hands on deck, actually busier than they were before, the delivery, that type of work. And then we have clients that are just looking at, how do we continue to engage with our employees and with our customers as well. I would argue that culture is key to that conversation. It's convincing, as we are right now in terms of learning, it's convincing leaders that the investment during this time right now will reap benefit, even if we don't see it in the next week or 2 weeks. Where we are right now is foundational in terms of planting. And so, I see a lot of the customers and clients felt a lot of chaos for the first month. And then the second month, there were a lot of difficult decisions that were having to be made. Into April, recognizing that, there's some growth within business, and some of the businesses I'm working with, as I stated, are starting to see growth. It's going to be interesting in this month as we start to open up doors and some business starts to come back into swing, even at a lower extent, what type of impact that's going to have. But I think the challenges are very broad and diverse, and it's going to look different for everyone. I think it's really crucial for us to consider that as we're reaching out to clients and customers right now, to really ask the question first, how are you doing? How's the business going? Rather than seeing everything transactional. We have got to get back to a very human experience in a very relational way, which I was always an evangelist of, rehumanizing business. But the challenges of today really require us to get back to that more and more. And so, the challenge is, how do I focus on culture when we're laying people off or we're furloughing people? How do we have the discussion of doing good in the world when it's hard to do good within the four walls of our business for those that work for us? And so those are some of the challenges that our customers and clients are facing. We haven't seen a whole lot of growth through culture of good during this time. As far as new companies coming in saying, hey, we've got money to spend, let's invest in your solution, and, let's build a culture of good during this time. So for us, it feels like a lot has been put on pause, and that's just, I think that's across the board for a lot of companies, a lot of businesses.
Yeah, I like a very thoughtful answer, and I think you're right. It varies tremendously. A couple of companies that we were working with over the last few months are almost the bookends of those examples that you gave, right? One was a major airline.
Yeah.
Needless to say, it was about keeping the doors open there, and everything else gets, as you said, the pause button put to it. The other one is a pizza company.
Yeah, right.
And apparently Global Pizza is doing really well right now. So kind of the two extremes, and then you have everything in between.
I hate to admit this, but I had pizza twice last week. So
I can tell from our client stock price that a lot of people are doing that.
One of the days was Sunday. And so I don't know if that's considered the beginning of the week, right? So really I only had pizza once last week.
That's how you look at it.
Technicalities.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey Ryan, I'm going to give Candace her kind of shot at you here. So
Yeah,
Candace,
sure.
I'll let you take it from here.
Great, thanks, Roger. Ryan, it's been great hearing your insights so far. You know, like your one of your talks is around bringing your soul to work, and of course, we've been talking about building a culture of good. I'm curious, from your perspective, how learning supports, you know, bringing your soul to work and building a culture of good.
Oh, yeah, that's great, Candace. Thank you for asking that. Great question. Here's what I think about how learning supports building a culture of good. When the creation story of the culture of good at TCC is one that was all about learning. So I went, like I stated earlier, from nonprofit work to for-profit. I had never done anything in corporate America at all. So at the very beginning of answering this question, I have to be very honest with the fact that I was going into corporate America not knowing much at all about business outside of nonprofit ministry, missional type work. So the way that the culture of good even began was through a series of learning what not to do, which I think is normal within a launch of any movement or business organization, whatever it is. Everything new, with new comes the unknown, and with the unknown comes mistakes and good failure that allows us to learn. And so from the very beginning, culture of good is all about learning. It's all about the organization learning how to do good peer-to-peer, employee to employee, employee to customer, and then, as I stated earlier, how to align a cause with the core competency or the strategy of the business. So you're tying purpose into the very essence and DNA of your business. That all takes learning. This is a new concept of how do we do good in the world, but how do we do it with a method and a strategy that works and that's proven. So one of the difficulties, if I were being very transparent and vulnerable on this conversation, one of the challenges that we have is people understanding the value of culture and understanding the value of having a cultural strategy, a people strategy within their business, and actually teaching the purpose of culture of good. And so even before someone begins to build a culture of good, there's a learning curve. And then once they engage with culture of good, what we built in our culture good, what we call culture good in a box, it really takes the guesswork out of it, but it's essentially a playbook of step-by-step guiding an organization through championing their people, championing their community, their customers, but doing it in a way where everyone can feel a sense of fulfillment in their everyday work. And when we talk about bringing our soul to work, we're talking about bringing our head and our heart. Yeah. People show up to work, they come for a paycheck, they spend the money, they many times our employees feel empty or disconnected, unengaged. And the way that I teach engagement is through fulfillment. That employee fulfillment is the new employee engagement. And in order to bring fulfillment into business, where we leave work at the end of the day feeling as though we did something that mattered, that our contribution was meaningful, that takes a lot of learning to get there. And so learning is how the culture of good really is built. So it's, how do we roll this out to the company? How do we gain buy-in from leaders that have a heart to do good, but really, I talk to CEOs, executives all the time as was traveling and doing keynotes that would say, we do all this good, but it seems very sporadic and it's, there's no system. And so, when you reveal a new system to an organization, what it really comes down to is the success of culture of good comes down to whether the executive team, middle management, all the way through all of the staff, how are they learning culture of good along the way? And so, yeah, learning is one of the pillars that supports culture of good. And then bringing your soul to work every day. So many of us kind of check that at the door, which now many of us are working from home, but we feel like we can't really show up fully as ourselves. And bringing our soul to work really means bringing the fullness of who we are, our mind, our heart, what we're passionate about, where we want to see our contribution in this world make a difference. It goes back to rehumanizing business and remembering what makes us human in the first place. And what makes us human, I think one of the things that makes us human is our capacity to learn in ways that allow us, that open up doors of opportunity for us to experience new things. And culture of good, even though I've been at it for 7 years, it's an introduction of something new to an organization. And so it all comes down to how well have I taught what culture of good is, and how well are people learning how to do this work, so that, a month, 2 months, 3 months, 10 months into this work, they're able to look back and say, because we built a culture of good, our employees are more fulfilled and engaged. Our customers want to do more business with us, and the world knows that we actually care in an authentic way. It's not just something that we say for marketing reasons, but we really do care. We have a soul to do this work.
Yeah, that's great. I identify with you a lot. I started my career off in nonprofit and doing a lot of grassroots organizing. So I get that. And, that engagement versus fulfillment is really a key one from this conversation. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've given us so much, but I'm going to ask that you dig a little deeper and give us some more. But do you have advice for, any business leaders or L&D leaders as it relates to this time?
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, but I would say that it's a vital time right now that we get back to asking ourselves as leaders how we define leadership. So for me, leadership is about the example we set. It's not about simply just having influence, or because you can have influence, but I wouldn't necessarily consider that leadership. Leadership are those that set the example rather than simply just saying, follow me. They're those that walk out ahead and experience the new and learn first. And part of their learning then is then translated through the example that they set for others to follow their lead. I'm not the first to say this, and there's others that could speak to this as well. But when I ask groups of people, individuals as well, to think back on a time when a leader stood out to them. As I spoke of earlier, if it was a teacher, coach, minister, parent, a friend, relative, whoever it is, look back on your life and you say, what about that leader stood out? What was it about that leader that really made their mark on my life? It usually 80 to 90% of the time I get answers that are very much connected to what I've been learning through. By the way, my wife and my 2 daughters are organizational, but also life coaches. So they teach me a lot of life coach things, and they also teach me how to be a better human. And usually the answers that I get back on what made that leader stand out to you was more through a feminine pathway than a masculine pathway. So it wasn't that they were just strong. It wasn't that they knew how to lead a team. It wasn't that they had grit. the leaders that stand out in our life are those that are empathetic. They showed up, they were caring, they listened really well. They stood with you when you were hurting. They didn't discount your own adversity or your own experience. They were present. They were kind. They stood out because they were in your corner and they supported you and they fought for you. Those type of things are really crucial right now more than ever. You know, when we look at latest statistics in terms of there was a poll done, and nearly 40% of people that were polled said that their company hadn't even asked them how they were doing.
Yeah.
You know, let's, as leaders, if you're listening and you do have influence or you do have rank and you do have authority, which are, you know, included within leadership, it doesn't necessarily define you as a leader. I would say, how are you tapping into the parts of what makes you human? And how is that translating to your leadership of those that you are privileged to lead? Not those that are obligated to follow you, but those that you're privileged to lead. And starting by asking this question of those that you're leading, and if it's today till tomorrow, you have 2 different meetings, starting that meeting simply by saying, how are you doing? Reaching out to those that you're leading and have the privilege to lead, starting there. I think it's important for leaders to tap into more of a feminine pathway of leadership right now than it ever has been before. It's always been there, but I think it's becoming more and more evident to us that type of leadership is really needed right now. People need to know that they're not just valued as an asset to the profitability of your business, but they are valued as a human being, as a human life, with real life experiences in real time, that today when I have a meeting with someone, they may be of good spirit, but the next day they could feel like the world is crumbling and falling apart around them, and it may actually be. And so continuing to check in with our people and ensuring that they do have a leader in their life that's going to be remembered 10, 20 years from now as that person that was willing to step in and really stand out in that person's life because of how much they were cared for and cared about.
Yeah. Well said, Ryan. That really makes a difference.
Yeah, thanks.
So you shared some of that from a leadership perspective on sort of the qualities that a leader needs. But now, you know, we've been in this for the last, 3 months or so. What are some additional skills and competencies that you feel need to be cultivated in the workforce today?
Yeah, so this has to do with the ideas around culture for me. Trust is a big one.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's going to be really difficult to grow a business during this time through the lens of micromanagement. And, you know, we could go on for an hour around the difference between micromanagement and leadership, but you know, I think trust is an imperative that needs to be built. And I think when we think of trust and empathy, and we think of building a sense of agility within the workforce, where we can retool things or services or products that we've had before, and being agile in terms of our, Roger, what you mentioned, our swiftness to change and all of those things. Those are skills. It's the practice of doing that work where we do, as with the culture of good when we first launched it, where we kept messing up and stepping into landmines. You know, it's the skills and competencies that are necessary for leaders to really position themselves in the sense of who we are and the DNA of who we want to be moving forward as a business. Great opportunity for leadership and those that are in leadership to shine, in terms of also giving the employees that type of culture that they believe in, that's not met with skepticism. And so for me, you know, we could list a lot of skills and competencies. I also do want to say, though, regardless of what we list as skills and competencies, as a student of leadership, I would say that leaders are going to cultivate what is embodied by them. And so we can't expect our people to embrace what we don't first embody. Yeah. And so regardless of what we say in terms of skills and competencies, is kind of the answer of the last question too, I would say, Candace, is, you know, if we want to build a culture of trust, you know, if we cultivate that, we have to be, as leaders, those that embody trust. And so if we don't trust those that we're leading and those that work for us or with us, then we're not going to build that type of culture. And so, you know, I get back to a few different things. You know, I would say love. Mm-hmm. And the reason that needs to be cultivated right now is because love isn't necessarily a thing we talk about in business a whole lot. Yeah. But it comes back to not just an emotional sense, but a sense of really feeling cared for, and leaders within an organization establishing that that's part of the essence and the DNA of who we are. I would say grace is a good one as well. Maybe not ones that you would pop up if you Googled skills and competencies of business. Love, grace, trust. Maybe some of this is from my nonprofit ministry sense of some of these things I stopped talking about for years. And, but that was all I spoke on. Those are the things that make us human. We want to feel worthy enough to be loved. We want to be given grace because we're going to mess up during this time. We're going to fail. We're going to, some days feel like throwing in the towel. We're going to miss Zoom calls. We're going to deal with something in the house or with a family member and not be available at work. We're going to need to really show each other a lot of grace during this time. And if we do that, I think that is what establishes that culture of trust and allows those that work with us and for us to be vulnerable and to show up fully as themselves and bring their soul to work. So skills and competencies, love, grace, and trust.
I like that a lot, especially, I mean, it's needed when you think about what you need to build an agile culture and a culture that can adapt quickly and pivot. Grace is definitely one of them, because you have to have a culture of experimentation, which requires, like you said, making mistakes and knowing that it's okay, right? Learn and fail fast. Yeah. So those are all great ones. So I know you have some good ones for this. What has helped you in regards to self-care during this time?
One of the most crucial things that I'm so grateful that I started prior to any of this was really self-leadership. I spent the last couple years writing a whole curriculum on self-leadership called 12-Week Leader. And that was a great practice, even if it doesn't blow up and become the greatest thing in the world. For me, it was such a great practice of really taking time for more self-awareness, checking in with myself. You know, when we think of leadership, checking in with those that we lead, self-leadership then would be checking in with ourselves. sitting with myself in silence, spending time in the morning, with just taking time to meditate. One of the things that's been really fun for me is taking what used to be routine and turning some of those things into more ritual. So, normally in the morning, I just take a quick shower, get moving, work out a little bit, whatever I sensed or felt like for that day. So, taking time. The other day, my wife was laughing because it was like 12:30 in the afternoon. I'm like, I'm going to take a bath. I lit candles. I was like, yeah, I got an hour to just chill. I'm going to actually chill. And secondly, along with turning routine into ritual rather than just kind of going through the motions. So adding those special elements into the day. The other thing is also recognizing that it's okay not to feel okay all the time.
Yeah.
If I check in with myself and I'm not doing all right, being okay with that, being willing to have those conversations and reach out. But sometimes I don't feel like that either, and it's okay not to be okay. And self-care is vital right now for our own mental health and emotional health and all of those things. But I also want to make sure that those that are listening understand as well that we're going to have some really crummy days and maybe some crummy weeks. And it's the other day I went and visited my daughter and her boyfriend, just drop off some gloves so that they could go to the grocery store and stuff and wear gloves and masks and all that. And just said hi real quick and laughed. And I have no idea why. I was walking the car and just started crying, just tears. And I got home and I really had to take some time with myself and ask, like, where did that come from? Why was I feeling that? And not feeling bad about feeling bad. Not feeling like if I feel like I'm on top of the world, because you see it on LinkedIn and social media, like people are like, hustle, you got this, stay positive. I'm like, okay, I get all that. And that's fine. But I also want to recognize that all of our experiences are different, and so how we care for ourselves, finding those rituals, taking time to check in with yourself, asking yourself, for me, it was, Ryan, what do you need? The other day I was at the grocery store, I was getting all healthy food. I've been eating really healthy. And I saw the family size box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And I thought, I need that in my life right now.
Yeah.
And without reservation, bought that. And in 3 settings, I ate enough. I ate that entire box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And it was fine. My life didn't end. It was fine. It's checking in with yourself and asking, what do I need today? Having those routines that are necessary, but also turning those into rituals, and then being okay with not being okay sometimes, and recognizing that there are going to be moments where you're sad. You need to check in with yourself and ask, what do you need? You may need to talk to someone. You may need to be silent. For me, that looks different almost every single day right now.
Yeah. I like that. It's almost authentic self-care is what you described. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's funny. I woke up this morning craving chocolate chip cookies.
Go get your chocolate chip cookies, Roger.
You better go get them.
I feel better now that I heard your story. I think I may just have to do that.
It's weird, isn't it, that we almost feel bad for wanting something that would bring us joy,
Yeah.
Now, if all you eat is chocolate chip cookies for the next 3 weeks, Roger, we're gonna have to check in with you.
No,
it'll just be one big dose and I'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. That's
awesome.
For me, that was what I needed that week. And so, yeah, it's really just checking in with myself and listening and following my own lead, trusting myself that I know what I need. It has been really, really important to me right now.
That's great. And just, final words on how do you plan to keep learning strong?
Hmm. To listen really well,
Mm.
to listen to diverse thought, to stay a questioner about the world and life, to be willing and open to listen to people that may have different views and perspectives than I might have. To you know, some of these answers can be obvious. Continue to read. Look for online opportunities, webinars, solutions that, like what we talked about earlier. If I want to go from point A to point B, my intention is not what determines where I'm headed. It's my direction that determines it. And so I could want as much as anyone else, but until that desire turns into drive of actually doing something to learn, if the only, let's just consider this, and this might be a really bold statement, but I'll say it this way: the only way to get from point A to point B is to learn what B knows that you don't know at A. Mm. Right? And so the only path forward from point A to point B is learning. If there's any bit of truth in that, then all I need to have is a vision for what B looks like, or what I want my tomorrow to be. And then my next obligation to myself and to my future destiny is to fully immerse myself into learning everything that I need to know about what B looks like. And as a part of the journey of learning, then I'll get there. And so for me, it's reading, it's listening, it's ensuring that I have, that I spend time every single day on my own personal development before I even consider professional development. Because before we go into our profession, we go in as a person. So we start with personal development, move into professional development, then we have a vision for the future that says, where am I headed? And then we determine what the direction that we're headed in based on what we're consuming and what we're learning along the way. And that can be a choice. We can actually be intentional about learning. And so for me, I plan to keep my learning strong by reading everything that I can and listening to every expert that I can. I've always throughout my life found those that are already at B, C, D, and E, and F, or down the alphabet. They're already there. And being a really good listener. I had a mentor once tell me that most people, their mouth starves their ears to death. Yeah. And and I've always held on to that because leaders and those that are learning are those that are listening. And so being very intentional about ensuring that you're spending at least 30 minutes to an hour every day in some form of learning about where you're headed, if you're actually headed that way. That really sets a trajectory of your life.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ryan, for taking this time to spend with us. It's been a really rewarding conversation. I know that the viewers that will watch will get a lot from it. I myself got some great insights from you today. To connect with Ryan, you can reach out to him on LinkedIn. And Ryan, I know you have a site where they could find your book.
Yeah, they can find my book on cultureofgood.com. And there's a page on there under resources. You can get it free, pay for shipping and handling. I think it's like $8, but we'll send that out to you. And so if you're interested in building a culture of good, that's a good place to start. checking out the site. You can also find me on ryanmccarty.com. So Culture of Good or Ryan McCarty. Those are
Perfect.
the two ways to get a hold of me.
Thank you, Ryan. And so we also encourage you all to share your story. Why is it important to keep learning strong? How are you keeping learning strong in your organization? Share it on LinkedIn, Twitter at #KeepLearningStrong. And you can find interviews like this one on our site, innovationsolutions.com/keeplearningstrong. Thank you for your time. And Roger, did you have any closing thoughts?
No, I found this particularly engaging and kind of inspirational in many ways. So thanks for making that possible, Ryan.
Yeah, Roger, thank you, Candace. And I would encourage all the listeners, Innovations, and check out their solutions with e-learning and learning all together. It's so important. So make sure you get on their website as well and reach out to them. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ryan.
Great. Thank you.